All right. Welcome to the second installment of Iceberg RevOps Accelerating Growth webinar series. This one's called Creating a Consistent and Scalable Sales Process. I'm Brad Mora. I'm CEO at Iceberg RevOps, and today we're going to be sharing strategies to build a better sales process. And so whether you're graduating from founder selling or revamping a current internal process that you have, I think there's going to be some good nuggets, some good inspiration, tactics, strategies for you to take out of today's conversation. Here to help us break down sales processes are Judy Cornett, who is a revenue operations manager at Iceberg RevOps. She spent the last 15 years in different sales capacities, including 8 years as a sales and sales operations consultant. Judy has built and revamped dozens of sales processes, and she truly has in the trenches knowledge that she's going to share with us today. I can definitely attest to that firsthand. Just over the past couple of months, having seen Judy build, I think 5 or 6 new sales processes. Also with us is Adam D'Angelo, managing director at Iceberg RevOps. Adam spent the last 10 years as a sales and CS leader, building multiple startup sales programs from the ground up, and most recently scaling a startup from 1 to 30 million in ARR prior to its sale in private equity. And so to kick things off today, we're going to start by talking about sales process fundamentals. But before we get into that, I think an interesting place to start is talking about what happens when a sales process is really bad or you almost don't have one at all. How does this feel internally within your org? What are the symptoms? Adam, can you paint us a picture here? I know we've talked about this off camera before in terms of situations you've walked into that have been just like this.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's important to call out first, I believe everyone has a sales process already. It's just, it may not be the one that's optimal for your audience. But right now, even today, if you're a founder-led sales or you've got 1 or 2 direct sellers, whatever they're doing is the sales process, whatever motion or next step that they're trying to drive towards when they have that conversation, that is your current sales process. So it's really just about not necessarily tearing anything down when you're thinking about building a new sales process. It's just how do we build a healthier foundation to have great conversations. But if you're thinking right now about do I feel positively or do I feel like there's room for improvement about the process? I think some of the symptoms that you may feel when you don't feel so great about the sales process is one, just kind of it can be painful. Misalignment is prevalent. It starts at the top generally. So everything from maybe a lack of a tightness around your ICP definition, your ideal customer profile, maybe softness around buyer personas, who those people are, what they care about, and the related use cases. Maybe it could be related to the way that your team portrays differentiation in your space versus available solutions, or the lack of differentiation that they're speaking to. And all of this misalignment can trickle down, obviously, to the seller's conversation and therefore into your results. And so another symptom would be generally frustration, poor pipeline conversion metrics, especially stage to stage, and your overall win rates. You're probably going to see a lot of drop off in your early stages, which means you're probably not connecting necessarily with the audience in terms of what's moving the needle for them to decide to evaluate further. You're probably going to see some inaccurate forecasting and sluggish growth. I think that inaccurate forecasting is just because there's not a good model in place for what a deal at a particular stage means, right? That definition is open to interpretation. And so trying to take a pipeline that doesn't have a process applied to it and then understanding where that's going to help you land or where you're going to might expect to land in terms of bookings for the quarter, for the month, whatever it is going to be pretty challenging. And then misalignment also on the customer side. So if you don't feel confident about what your sales team is saying and the way that they're describing differentiation, the way that they're talking about key use cases and potential value, you may put your customers in a situation where they sign on and those expectations don't become reality pretty quickly, which is a good way to also feel some pain around churn. So that's generally what I think about in terms of do I feel like my sales process is quality or is it? And these are the things that you're generally going to feel in business.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Before we move on to the next segment, I did want to mention, if you do have any questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A. We'll be answering those at the end. We're going to leave a couple minutes for that. And so, Adam, a quick recap on everything that you just said. Pain, misalignment, frustration, these are common internal sentiments. I'm sure people on this call have experienced this before if they've been in earlier stage startups. And then more specifically, you're going to be battling poor pipeline conversion, inaccurate forecasting, misaligned customer expectations. These are the things you can expect to be prevalent when things are not working. And so with that foundation set, Judy, can you start by walking us through how we actually define what a sales process is in the simplest forms at Iceberg?
Yeah, and I think from the most basic level, it's really the steps that your salespeople are using to take somebody from a lead to a closed deal. That's very, very simple. And of course, there's many different things that go into that process, but that's how I like to frame it at the highest level. Like Adam mentioned, there's good and bad and efficient and inefficient sales processes. And there's always obviously room for improvement on those. I like to tell clients when I'm onboarding with them and I'm talking through a sales process that your ideal sales process should really support your current sales structure and your sales methodology, but really kind of lay the groundwork to scale.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think it's important to try not to boil the ocean, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a little bit, but try to keep complexity low when you're bringing a new sales process into reality. We're trying to build a foundation. We're not trying to be everything to everyone right now. And just know that it's an iterative process that you're going to come back to on a regular basis. And you probably want to make that part of your recurring operating cadence for future review anyway.
Adam, I think we should keep tugging on this thread. So, Judy, that was an excellent explanation, just in the simplest form, what a sales process is. Adam, can you start talking to us about what good actually looks like? What makes an effective sales process?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of ways to think about it. When I think about what good looks like, I generally lump these things into a couple of buckets. So one, I mentioned it earlier, but alignment. What I mean here is alignment across your marketing and sales teams, especially, but also customer success and potentially product as well, depending on your stage. But is there alignment around the story that we need to tell, and is it the right story for the types of potential buyers that we're bringing into the funnel? And a lot of that is also going to be informed based on the value chain that your existing user base gets from using your solution. Then is it clearly defined? So does everyone understand what good looks like and how to execute that? And there's a number of ways to do this. Some are in CRM, some are not, but we need to have a clear definition around what our sales process is and how to do it. Moving on, is it consistent and repeatable? So the most important thing here is, can you run this playbook? Is it a good fit for 80%, let's say, of your target audience? If we're having conversations in our core playbooks and our core sales process doesn't tie back to what's going to move the needle for 80% or more of the prospects that we're bringing into the funnel, then that's probably a signal that we need to make some tweaks. And then handoffs. So cross-functional handoffs that exist between your marketing and sales team, or maybe even more specifically, your marketing to your SDRs, whether they're on the sales or the marketing side, your SDRs to your sales, and then also your sales to your CS team. Those handoffs they kind of fall under the radar, but there's a lot of value there, and there's also a lot of impact to the customer experience that can either really be the differentiation between winning a deal and losing it, or retaining a customer or not retaining a customer. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a few moments, but alignment, clear definitions, consistent and repeatable, and having good handoffs across cross-functional is where I'm going first.
Yeah, Adam, I agree 1000% on those kind of buckets of a good sales process. And to drill down a little bit, in terms of alignment, I think it's just the most important to have that alignment and have discussions before we even talk about building out the process. And before we get to technology, obviously, in terms of defining your process clearly, a guide I like to use is my documentation. If I can't write it down or map it in a Miro, it's probably not a great process, right? If I have all of these different branches and what ifs and all of this craziness, then it's probably not as simple as it should be. So I think that's a really good kind of marker for, is this a good starting process? And then obviously you should have the documentation anyway to help enable your sales team and anybody that's going to be working on the process in the future. And then I'm really glad that you touched on handoffs, because handoffs is a huge one, especially when we talk about the prospect experience. You mentioned the marketing sales and the sales CS handoff. Another one that I see that is neglected a lot are any handoffs within the sales function. So if you have an SDR or a BDR that's starting the process and then handing off to an AE, that needs to be thought through both in the internal process and how your prospect is going to perceive it. I bet we've all kind of been on the prospect side of that handoff done poorly. I had that experience recently where I was evaluating a tool for a client. I schedule a demo, an SDR reaches out, schedules time. Guess what? It's not a demo, it's a discovery call. Okay, I answer the questions. Next time we talk to the AE, it's discovery again, right? Before I even get to see the product. That's a terrible customer experience. And that's something that's the fault of the sales process and needs to be looked at. So definitely agree with all of those buckets of kind of what makes a good sales process, and how you can just continually optimize and look at those buckets.
Yeah, and to elaborate a little bit further on that last point, when you think about this in the context of like a competitive situation, and we know there's a lot of solutions out there that are high parity, right? Your handoffs and the way that your sales process drives those handoffs is so critical. So in that same scenario where your SDR and your AE both basically have the same initial conversation, and that could occur over a week of real time, right? At the same time, that same prospect may have already had a solid conversation, initial conversation, and have completed a demo and maybe moving into a trial experience. And at that point, this is where those handoffs really start to dictate your win rate. And so that's why we're harping on making sure that this is a portion or a well thought part of your sales process and go beyond just some of the things that are basic blocking and tackling when you think about the conversations that your teams need to be having with prospects.
Awesome. So I want to keep us moving forward, just so I think we hit all of the big pieces of getting to a scalable sales process. And so I think everything we just talked about set an excellent foundation for what a sales process actually is, what makes it effective, things like alignment, definitions, handoffs. Let's take it one step further and talk about scalability for an effective sales process. What does it mean to actually achieve scalability? Adam, can you kick us off on this?
Yeah, so when you're trying to design a scalable sales process, you want something that, like we've mentioned quite a few times now, is going to be easily repeatable and can be acted upon in a consistent manner across the large majority of the sales conversations and cycles that you're going to have. So when we hear process, I think a lot of people go immediately to systems and workflows, but I really encourage everyone to start think a bit higher level first, and then work your way into the systems and the individual workflows. So again, start with a ICP definition and understanding of the buyer journey, and make sure that you're mapping that buyer journey first, awareness, consideration, and so on, and then start to align your seller actions to those steps in the buyer journey. And this means, for example, whether understanding whether a demo on the first call is the recommended seller action. You have to think, are my buyers in a position where they're highly educated, or do we need to start a bit slower and build awareness around problems and solutions before we move into a demo type environment? And once you've got those seller actions aligned with the buyer journey, I think that's where I like to start thinking about your entry and exit criteria. So what I mean by that is like, what are the milestones that a buyer needs to achieve to verify that they've progressed to the next stage in the evaluation process? And I'm very specifically calling out the buyer here versus the seller, because we have to remain customer centric throughout this process. That's going to be the way that the buyer is going to feel like we're on that same side of the table with them, and that we're transitioning from a seller to more of an advisor and a consultant who's an expert in the space and an expert in the problem that they're trying to solve. When I think about buyer actions and seller criteria, I think maybe to get a little bit more specific, like the most generally applicable example that I can think of where these two things diverge is early stage qualification. And you generally have your buyer exit criteria that you want that to relate more to the problem and the solution awareness and their ability to define the impact of maybe solving it or solving this problem that they have, or not solving the problem. Whereas a lot of times on the seller side, internally on the CRM, whatever this, the things that the sales reps or the SDRs are encouraged to look for is like BANT related. And that essentially means we're testing the buyers to see if they're ready to buy. Do they have a project? Do they have a budget? Do they have timing allocated to this? And I mean, the disconnect there is, how could they possibly be prepared to buy a solution if they're coming into awareness of the problem right now? And that's our job, to try to help them get there. And so that's why it's so critical to make sure you're aligning your seller actions with your buyer steps, rather than just defining your seller steps in a vacuum. And so once we've got those milestones down, then we can start to determine the logistics behind them. So like, who from the buyer committee should be participating in each one of these stages? What are common objections or social proof points that we typically need to surface at these points? What competitive scenarios are we going to come across, and how should we mitigate those? And now that we have a picture of all of these things, that's when we start to develop the actual playbooks that are an aggregation of these, and the way that you want to coach your sales team to execute against that buyer stage or that buyer journey step. So I covered a lot there. I think, though, it might be helpful if I turn over to Judy to talk a little bit now about systems and workflows, and maybe leveraging technology to install some of this.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about leveraging technology, I want to go back to kind of your first point there, in having the ICP and buyer personas and the buyer journey defined at the outset. Not to mean that that's going to never change, right? But having solid definitions there before we even talk about mapping a process and then putting it in the technology. And I say that because if you don't have an idea of who you're selling to, or who your target market is, or anything like that, then we're constantly changing direction. And when we're constantly changing direction, but we're already building it out in your CRM, and we're changing opportunity stage definitions and entry and exit criteria every couple of weeks, then nothing is accurate in your CRM. Your forecasting isn't accurate. Your conversion rates aren't accurate. Your data is becoming kind of a mess at an unsustainable pace. And your sellers don't know what they're focusing on. So it's really kind of the worst case scenario if you're trying to go so fast that you don't do your pre-work and define those things at the outset. And I say that because I've seen that before, right? People that they just want to get going, they want to get selling, but they don't do that work up front, and it becomes a really big mess, and it slows you down more at the end of it, because you're constantly redoing work, and then your sellers are confused, which leads to turnover and all other different sorts of things. So I think that's just a really, really important point to make, and that we want to drive home today. But once you do have that defined, and once you have, the milestones, seller actions defined that Adam was just talking about, you can use that as your roadmap to leverage technology. You can start at the beginning of the funnel and see, okay, where are my leads coming in? You can start asking the questions of, how is marketing surfacing those leads to my salespeople? How do those leads need to be assigned to my salespeople? Am I using round robins? Do I have territories? All of those different questions to start to leverage the technology. Adam just mentioned, does it fit for your customer to have a demo as the first call, to have a demo as the first action? That'll directly influence your sales tech stack or your GTM tech stack, right? If I'm going to have a demo as my first call, does it make sense for me to have some kind of scheduling tool, right? To make it as easy as possible for that prospect to get that demo on my AE's calendar. And then a really important one is that exit and entry criteria, right? Really mindfully setting up your opportunity process within whatever CRM you have to balance those checks and balances and validations on your salespeople, right? To make sure that they're using your sales methodology and they're meeting those exit and entry criteria as they're going through the process, and gathering the relevant data needed to support everything on the back end, including measurement of KPIs so that we can continually improve the process.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially with that last point too around KPIs. And so like expanding on that a little bit, when you're thinking about setting up your CRM to support your sales process, the thing as a sales leader that really comes to my mind is, how am I going to use the information and the report sets that are coming from the opportunity records, for example, and the fields on that opportunity record to do pipeline inspection? And so I think it's really important that you understand which of the fields and the exit entry criteria that are mission critical to your deal moving forward. And I set up some sort of reporting that allows for management level and individual contributor level to easily identify those red flags. And that way your conversations and your one-on-ones, your pipeline reviews, wherever you're having those discussions are very pointed around, you're telling me this deal is in stage 2 or stage 3, you're committing it for the end of the quarter, but we know that typically we need to have these 3 things in place. There's 2 missing. What are we going to do? What's the next action that we're going to take when we leave this meeting to go get those things done, right? And then it's surprising, but maybe not pretty obvious, like how impactful having the right red flag report set or the right report set to offer quality pipeline inspection is for quality meetings and actually driving next steps with the reps. So I think pay a lot of attention in there, just as much as you are as it relates to KPIs around success metrics. Think about the KPIs that you need for deal inspection.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense from the scalability standpoint. You need to execute in those pipeline meetings to do that at scale, like that level of tactic and understanding how to leverage those KPIs properly. It makes a lot of sense. We are getting close on time, and I do want us to spend a little bit of time on challenges that Judy, you as a consultant have seen, Adam, you as a historic operator, in actually getting to this defined, scalable, effective sales process that we've been talking about for the duration of the webinar.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So overcomplication is challenge number 1. And I think just keep it simple, build your V1, make sure, again, it's suitable for 80% of your net new pipeline that's coming in, and then iterate from there once you start to see the KPIs and the conversion metrics. The second thing is under-resourcing. So make sure your reps have what they need to actually execute the sales process that you're putting in front of them. Of course, from a systematic and technology standpoint, but I'm thinking more about seller resources. So if a visual demo experience is critical to your buyers, make sure that exists. I've been on the buy side and the sell side of a lot of solutions where the seller didn't have complete confidence in the trial experience, or maybe it was very basic, but it didn't really speak to the story that we want to tell in that demo, and it falls a little bit flat. So there's a number of different examples, but I'll call out demo. Make sure that you're not under-resourcing the team so they can actually follow through. And enablement, so kind of similar, but the challenge of not committing enough time, energy, and resource to ensuring short and long-term adoption of the sales process. So when you're asking your team to make a shift in the way that they're selling, this is a huge shift, and getting it right takes a lot of time and practice. And so there needs to be a material commitment to coaching and improving on that process. So some easy things that you can do is set call coaching or scoring, however you're doing that feedback loop. Set some sort of KPI for the people who are responsible for doing that. So in the past, I like to have my sales managers responsible for doing at least 2 per week per rep. Now it depends on the size if that's of your team, if that's going to be scalable or your rep to manager ratio, but set some standards in place to make sure that we're getting enough feedback to the sales reps to actually help them understand if they're shifting their behaviors towards the conversation that we want them to have.
Yeah, and Adam, your first one is also my number one, the overcomplication or over-engineering of a process, especially in the technology. But also in that vein is a bloated tech stack. I see this time and time again. People buy tools to buy tools. They're cool, they do cool things. So-and-so has this tool. My previous company used this. And then we get to a point where instead of building out the process and then figuring out what technology we need to support that process, we're building our process around the technology that we have. And that becomes really, really difficult for your sellers and likely your customers and prospects, because we have this kind of Frankenstein process that doesn't really meet their needs, and just makes it more of an inefficient process all around. So that's a really big one for me. The other one that you didn't mention was failure to start. I see a lot of people that feel like if they can't figure out what the perfect process is, they just don't start building out any process. It's not going to be perfect. No sales process is perfect. And that's why we build them simply and then we keep iterating. So I think that's a really important point to make as well.
Excellent. So we're coming up right at time. So I want to take a quick second and say thank you for everyone who joined today. We really appreciate the great turnout for this. Adam and Judy, thank you for spending time with us on this. We do have 2 questions for those of you who can stick around for 1 or 2 more minutes, we're going to do a little bit of Q&A that came in. Adam, I think I'll throw this first one to you, just given we had a conversation about this recently, but where does, let me read it as is. How do you think about AI as part of your sales process?
Oh man, I think it's a complicated question right now because we're kind of in the AI hype cycle, and AI everything. Maybe I would just suggest be careful not to overcomplicate and over automate your sales process, especially when you're rolling it out. You may find that a more methodical and manual approach early, where reps need to really experience each component step of the process, will help build the behaviors, and then we can start to layer AI in and automate where possible. I do think there is some low hanging fruit though. So pre-call research, the show me, you know me. I think there's a lot of application there where we can use AI to reduce some of the burden on the rep and give them better insights than they would gather maybe on their own. And we could feed that to them in a number of different ways to make sure that there's better rapport building up front and better alignment of your solution to some of the key things that the business is actually trying to achieve. And maybe similar on the post-call side for data capture and administration. Everyone knows that sales reps don't want to do the admin work after the call. So there are ways to leverage AI to automate the data capture, to automate the CRM entry, to improve the call notes that are typically on opportunity records, right? And to provide some analysis of the call experience, and you can pump that into the CRM and create reporting around that too. So that's probably where I would think to look to get started with AI.
Excellent. And then Judy, I'll throw the last one to you. When do you need to have your sales process defined by? What key hires trigger this?
That's kind of a hard one because I think at some level it depends on the organization, but I feel like if you're founder selling or if you have maybe one AE and they're an experienced and comfortable seller, I feel like as long as they have a process, whether it's defined or not, I think that kind of works for that stage of the organization. If they can be gathering data while they're doing that, obviously that'll help inform the sales process when you really need to build it out. I feel like once you have more than, say, like one person selling, once you have 2, 3, 4 AEs, or a combination of SDR, BDR, AEs, I think it becomes really, really important to have that defined process to make sure that everybody is going through the process the same way, so that you can gather those KPIs, those metrics, and then also so that you're thinking about that customer journey, because once you have more than one person moving people through that journey, that's when handoffs and things like that can get really sloppy and really hurt your bottom line.
Excellent. All right, Adam, Judy, really appreciate the time today. Thanks again for everyone who's stayed on. I think this was a great session, and we look forward to the next one. Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.